Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Katy Brennan, and I lead Global Thought Leadership here at LRN. I want to welcome you to our session, How Stories Build Empathy, Guide Better Decisions, and Foster Stronger Cultures of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Over the past year in the United States and around the globe, we've seen organizations embrace both the business and moral imperatives to accelerate the creation of more open, inclusive, and respectful workplaces. We've seen racial equity commitments reach more than $2 billion since the killing of George Floyd in May of last year. And I know many of us have seen study after study that shows employees have very high expectations of their employer's values. A question we get a lot at LRN and in the responsible business community generally is which values or whose values? Gender and racial diversity top the list, according to a new study recently featured in Fortune magazine. And it's not just about having values, but acting on them in real and in authentic ways. In fact, as 2/5 of respondents of that same study said they would join a company that lacks the requisite diversity, but only if it had a strong DE&I program in place to try to improve. And these are just some of the dynamics that relate to the commitments and actions in DE&I. In just a minute, we will hear from our panelists about the ways they're stimulating change through fostering open and honest conversations, building more empathy with colleagues and in teams, and touching both the hearts and the minds of their people. But first, just a few housekeeping notes. We will be opening this conversation up for questions. We will reserve some time at the end. You should see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A area. Please type your comments or questions in there. We will be sure to touch upon them at the Q&A portion at the end, and I'll try my best to bring them in during the course of the conversation. Also, the Compliance Certification Board has approved this event for 1.2 continuing education units based upon attending the event in its entirety, and you will receive a certification and a follow-up email after the event. But now on to our amazing panelists. I'd first like to introduce you to Jennifer Brunel. Jennifer is the head of charitable giving at NRG Energy, responsible for creating community partnerships and overseeing organizations' employee giving program and disaster relief efforts. Jennifer is also the steward of NRG's business resource groups, which are central to NRG's approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. She reports to the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer and sits at the intersection of other corporate functions related to DE&I. Jennifer's unique perspectives will be so helpful as we learn together today. Welcome, Jennifer. Next, Rachel Collins is the head of inclusion and diversity at Colt Technology Services, where she provides strategic direction and management over all aspects of the inclusion and diversity function. She greatly enjoys all aspects of this position and thrives on finding solutions to complex issues. She has a proven track record for managing intricate projects with diverse clients and senior stakeholders, and has successfully developed and led colleagues and highly successful HR teams. Welcome, Rachel. And Nadine Jones. Nadine is a seasoned vice president with expertise in developing and maintaining a corporate ethics and compliance program for a multi-billion-dollar logistics company. As a graduate of Howard University Law School, Nadine has a strong sense of social justice and equity. In June of 2020, she co-founded an organization called The Initiative, advancing the Blue and Black Partnership. The initiative was established to end systemic police violence and implement a collaborative approach to building healthy, scalable community policing models. LRN recently announced a partnership with the initiative, helping them deliver online education on a range of topics from mindfulness to procedural justice. Welcome, Nadine. And just to kick us off, I'd like to ask the same question to all of our panelists, just to allow us to get to know you a little bit. and how you're helping to shape your organization's DE&I journey. So Jennifer, if I could start with you, could you tell us a little bit about what does DE&I mean in your work, and a little bit about your role in your organization's DE&I journey?
Thank you, Katie, and thank you to LRN and my fellow panelists. So I, as you mentioned, head up the philanthropic giving of the organization, which is a unique intersection in terms of how we view diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is one of our core values at NRG, and our goal is to be able to allow employees to bring their whole authentic selves to work. We want to bring diverse viewpoints into our conversations, so not only can we work better together, but we can better serve our customers and our communities. Where I sit, as you mentioned, I report to our Chief Compliance Officer, and it allows me to work both with his team and his group, as well as the HR team, to really develop a program that encompasses all aspects, not just the head or the logical piece of diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of equal opportunity employment and the rules and regulations that we need to comply to, but also the emotional component, the heart of DE&I. Everybody is on a journey, and we need to meet people where we are. So it's that balance between the two and the teamwork of all of these cross functions that really drive our program at NRG.
Thanks, Jennifer. We'll want to dig into that a little bit further as we continue talking. Rachel?
Yes, so at Colt, we talk about driving an inclusive workforce thriving on diversity. So this is really about, beyond, we want to drive equal opportunities so that everyone is able to join, develop, and progress within our organization. But it's really going over and above in terms of really unlocking people's potential, because as Jennifer said, it's around ensuring people feel able to be themselves at work. If people are spending their time thinking to themselves, have I told that person this about myself or that about myself, and trying to, perhaps hide or avoid certain conversations, that's a level of energy that is not going towards helping to thrive at work. So, we absolutely aim to do that. Our program, well, we've worked on D&I initiatives for a number of years. We were quite initiative based, and we've moved to more of we launched a global strategy 2 years ago, and that's really looked at, how we can embed as well as work through the different initiatives that we have, because I think you really need to have that balance between the engagement side and the compliance side. So I think, it's really key for a D&I professional to be working with stakeholders across the business. This is not just a HR thing, it's a business-wide activity, and it's an opportunity across the whole of the business. So, yeah.
Thanks, Rachel. We'll talk a little bit more about culture as we proceed here. Nadine, over to you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, LRN. Thank you, Katie, and everyone for inviting me. I'm going to speak in terms of the initiative and the Blue and Black partnership that we formed last year. And I'll be perfectly frank, going into it, we weren't thinking in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the sense in which we talk about it now. But what we knew immediately was that we needed to have a collaborative approach to finding solutions to this divide between members of the Blue community that we perceive, members of the Blue community and members of the Black community in particular. And so what happens is, when you need to collaborate, when your success depends on a collaborative process, then you need to be inclusive. You need people to be seen, You need people to be heard. You need to be seen. You need to be heard. And so in our many engagements with members of the Blue community, the co-founders and myself, we're Black women, mothers of Black sons, Howard University, it could have been very off-putting or sense of, well, we can't work with them because we've already prejudged the Blue community. And so in the process of trying to find a workable solution to improve local relationships between local police and civilians, we necessarily had to be inclusive and hear members of the Blue community and see them and understand, and we'll talk about it more, but that, develops empathy on both parts. So that's how we approached it.
Thanks, Anid. Can I stay with you for a minute and ask a follow-up? So I would love, earlier today, we talked a little bit about the importance of values as a means of really connecting people, and love to maybe just hear a little bit from you about kind of go a level deeper around what have you learned about forging communities and deepening understandings? Particularly, I think about what I'm assuming are sometimes very different perspectives or mindsets, obviously different stakeholders, often strained relationships and a heated environment. I mean, could you just talk what some of the lessons that you've learned about that, and how have human values related to that work?
I would love to. First, you need to really believe that you can't get to where you want to go without the other person. So you can put that in any context, corporate, let's talk about the widget. You cannot produce the best widget unless you get the views of women, of LGBTQ community, of people of color, Black, you have to really believe that. And so in the context of the initiative, we believed we could not get to where we wanted to go, which was safer communities, without the police walking with us arm in arm. So that belief is what is going to anchor you through difficult conversations. That's what's going to anchor you through discomfort, right? I had a police officer blame single mothers for all the crime, and I'm thinking, but I'm a single mother. My son, doesn't commit any crime. That was an outlier, but I had to be willing to sit and listen to him. And then I shared my view, and we received each other. It was really quite an amazing conversation. So you need to have that belief on both sides in order to collaborate. You also need to be vulnerable. You need to share and show some vulnerability. And I don't know the neuroscience behind it, but it does cause some type of bonding, like we start to see each other. So I need Blue to show me some vulnerability, and I also need to show some vulnerability as well, and be respectful. And those have been the pillars and the values that have held us together this long. And we think we've gotten some really wonderful collaborations from members of the Blue community and community-based organizations, because we do believe in those pillars, those values. Thanks,
Anid. We'll talk a little bit about neuroscience in a little bit here. Rachel, this whole session today is about telling stories, being open, welcoming people in, speaking and listening. I think we all know that stories shape culture. Historically, though, I think some of the stories that were told within companies weren't always inclusive of the lived experiences of everyone, or maybe they didn't help in creating a workplace where everyone felt as though they were welcome and respected, or maybe even upheld power structures and systems that really limited change. And so in our last conversation, you had shared some really great examples of stories and how stories have helped you within your own organization. I'm just wondering if you could maybe talk about what's really been working for you at Cult.
Sure, I think stories are really central to this. It's difficult to elicit change. I think what you can get with conversations sometimes with inclusion and diversity, you can get people talking about it as if it's an intellectual debate about whether, talking about the rights of a group. Sometimes people approach it like it's an intellectual debate, and actually thinking about the fact that there's a human being or many human beings on the end of that, at the end of that debate, I think is really, really important to not lose sight of. In terms of stories, my background is actually marketing communications, and then moved into a D&I position. So I've always got excited by stories. And a couple of years ago, we launched we launched an initiative called Humans of Cult, because I love Humans of New York, the photo blogs. And really what I wanted to do was tell personal stories and show the real diversity of the people across our organizations, almost like diversity champions. But I didn't want to use the phrase diversity champions. I just wanted to tell people to tell their stories, in an authentic way. And I think this builds trust. I think it builds belonging. And that has been really, really successful, actually. We started out saying that we were going to select 12 people to tell stories on, about, or ask them to tell their story. We start off, just asking things like, who's most inspired you? What's your favorite possession? Things like that. What are you proud of? And try and draw the story out. And we've now done hundreds. This is one that keeps going and going and going. And we have people wanting to join our organization saying, oh, and I saw Humans of Cult on your website, and I thought that was really good. I think the power of stories is like I've said, I think really seeing the person at the end of that debate or that belief, or whatever it might be. We have also started doing a lot of podcasting, and that's quite a different approach to these kind of short, sharp stories. But the podcasts have started to work really, really well. Having somebody share a lived experience, and then perhaps having someone external to our business talking about research, bringing the outside in, that's worked really well as well. So we're on our second series of podcasts as well.
Thanks. And just a quick follow-up on that, you had mentioned that you've seen some positive outcomes in terms of recruitment. Are there other ways that you've experienced impacts of some of these programs?
I mean, it helps to raise people's profile within the business, being involved with inclusion and diversity initiatives, people that might not have got involved before. I think that has been a really positive outcome of this. I think sometimes in corporate environments there is often the kind of the usual suspects, the people that always get put forward, the people that always end up presenting on something, and I think what we've done is really widened the net and got a lot more people involved than we ever have before. And we always ask ourselves now with any initiative, who hasn't done this before? Who else can we reach out to? Who else can we bring in?
I love that. That's great. Jennifer, we've been talking about, and I think Rachel just illustrated that, building connections between people as a means to do many things. Here at LRN, we often talk about the neuroscience of engagement, and that, really finding those ways that allow learners to become engaged when they can see others' humanity and find common ground. I'm just wondering, what techniques are you finding that are kind of enabling a deeper level of engagement and hopefully fostering that kind of increased empathy and understanding among your people and teams?
Sure. We received feedback early on in terms of our self-led DE&I trainings. And what we heard was that it was helpful, but it lacked that human element to it. So as our program grew, we designed it in a way that directly tied to that human approach. So whether it was more interactive sessions with employees where you were sharing those stories, where you were becoming vulnerable in small groups, in safe spaces, so that you could find the commonality with your coworkers. But there's opportunity through the philanthropic lenses. You're getting to know each other, you're finding those commonalities, and you're breaking down those barriers that might through a different lens. So it serves the communities, particularly as it relates to our volunteering, but it really tries to encompass that whole notion of how can we get people to collaborate that wouldn't otherwise be working on the same project within the organization, and how can we start these conversations so that people become more comfortable reaching out to their colleagues, particularly through this year and a half of remote work.
Yeah, earlier today we were talking a little bit about how, you know, the environment in which we're operating, not only the remote work, but the fact that we are kind of becoming increasingly polarized and everything seems to be a bit politicized these days, making this work all the more important, but also challenging. I'm wondering, how have you guys thought about that? And maybe you could talk a little bit about, you know, how are you encouraging, you know, conversations where, you know, people can both speak honestly and truthfully about their experience, but then also the other person is really kind of experiencing in a open.
I think it's definitely leading by example. It's holding grace, and it's you know, asking for grace. It's recognizing that you are not going to get everything perfect. And that's okay. And not judging somebody or judging yourself when you say something that is not appropriate, that you might not understand the other person's perspective. And it's having the dialogue and the conversation as to why, as opposed to shutting down or that initial fear of speaking up to begin with. So it's really important to have that and to hold that so that you can continue courageous and difficult conversations, and creating a safe enough space where people feel that they can do that. One of the things, as an aside, that I will mention that we've implemented with our business resource groups is we don't record the majority of our sessions. And the reason we do that is because we don't want people to take things out of context. We don't want people to feel that they're on camera. And if you're going to be there, you need to be present. And we had some pushback initially in terms of, hey, I missed out. I want to see a recording. This is important. Why aren't we cataloging this? And it's just as important to show up and to have the space as it is to have the conversation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you so much. Lot to follow up on there. I do like that idea that I think people feel some amount of pressure to feel perfect in these kinds of conversations, or right. And you know, being a person is messy. And so I like that idea of embracing the imperfection. So thank you so much for sharing that. We've been talking about the fact that a lot of the folks that are watching today are responsible for the ethics and compliance function within their organizations. And so Nadine, I would like to ask you, if I could, obviously you're an ethics compliance professional. Like I mentioned earlier, you know, you've built this robust ethics compliance program for a large multi-billion-dollar organization. And then your work at the initiative is at the intersection of so much, you know, humanity and society and politics and the public and community and private and public institutions. I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about, you know, how does your work in the social justice realm, any lessons there that you'd want to impart to your E&C counterparts, or perhaps vice versa?
Vice versa, actually. That's part of that's a driving reason why we created the initiative, because we saw such a gap that nobody else seemed to see. which we found very curious. So back in 2020, summer 2020, I know some of us don't want to go back to the year that shall never be mentioned again. But just for this one moment, remember where we were as a country. And after the murder of George Floyd and all of this discussion about litigation, qualified immunity was on the table, legislation, and Congress needs to do something. And when you are a compliance professional, you can see immediately that espousing great values, and they're wonderful values at that high level, doesn't necessarily translate into day-to-day reality. So you know that immediately because you live in that world of translating corporate values and policies and translating it so that it's part of the day-to-day reality, which is where we live. That's where we live. And so we took that understanding because we understood, a 100-page statute is not going to repair the fractured relationships at the ground level. When it's at that high of a level, when it's paper only and the ideals are not lived, you can have a counter effect of resentment. You can see workarounds because people don't really believe in what you're doing anyway. They don't believe the policy. They don't believe what's in it for me. So we jumped into this space not to inform the E&C corporate community, but because the E&C corporate community had trained us to look at the situation in a different way. And we knew that there has got to be local day-to-day relationships, day-to-day work. We talk about rank and file. We talk about local chiefs that live in this day-to-day reality. And we try to influence them to want to collaborate with citizens or civilians like us for a common goal. And so it takes a lot of talk. It takes a lot of, we've discussed this before, humaning, which is, I'm trying to see if we can make that a new verb. It's tiring, it's exhausting sometimes because it pulls a lot out of you. But here's one quote that I just found this morning. I knew about it, but I didn't have it written down. But this is what drives the initiative in many respects. It's a quote by Albert Einstein, okay? No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. We have to evolve, we have to stretch, we have to get to that higher level of how we interact with each other if we're going to solve today's problems. And so it is exhausting, but it's worth it. It is definitely worth it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's been kind of like a common refrain during the pandemic that, the pandemic is a portal and allows you the time to kind of think about what needs to be rethought. And if you don't mind, Nadine, I'd like to kind of stay with you just for a minute and follow up with you because you said a lot that I think we could unpack. But one thing that you commented on is that, kind of the pressure, I think, these are my words, but the pressure to make change. And interestingly, I was just, for a different project at LRN, I was studying the Renaissance, and I listened to a historian at Oxford being asked the question about, like, what does this feel like to the person that was an average citizen going through the Renaissance? Did they actually notice this fundamental, like, tremendous culture change, historical significance? And the answer was no. Culture change, systems change takes time. And I'm just wondering, like, can you share with us, like, how do you think about time and progress? Like, what I'm thinking is, like, we're a fast-moving world, people want change immediately. Like, how do you kind of manage the two, like this desire for change while also really wanting to make real change?
I wish I had the answer to that. I don't have the answer. What I do know, though, is that within ourselves, and I'm an attorney by trade. I'm not particularly like, high-end thinking and deep academic theoretical thinking. I like facts, I like the law. But, this process, it's yes, there are systems that need to be reformed and dismantled. I'm not talking about policing. I'm talking about systemic inequities and systemic injustices and so forth. But I can tell you that the system will crumble much more readily and more quickly when those of us who populate it have a higher learning. Okay. Part of the problem is we keep populating these broken systems, but we haven't evolved ourselves. And so we just keep refilling generation after generation into the same unevolved heart going into the same broken system. And then we're like, yo, we've been talking about this for 150 years. Like, why are we still dealing with this? Because we haven't expanded. So I don't have the quick answer, but I do know it is incumbent on each and every one of us to take the time and check ourselves, our biases. A great indicator, I shared it before we started the call, I won't go into it now, but a great indicator that you need to check yourself is a lack of empathy. If you have a lack of empathy for whatever group, whatever the situation is, take a step back. In our busy, crazy world with people reaching you and pinging you on WhatsApp and Messenger and Facebook and LinkedIn, and you're just overwhelmed, take a step back and find out what is it in you, why you could be so dismissive of that group. Each and every one of us, Black, white, straight, gay, it is incumbent upon us to evolve eternally. And then I think the systems that we then populate will be easier to change. I will see you more clearly, Katy. You will see me more clearly. And we're going to look at the system and say, this is broken. We got to do something about that. I can't tolerate that, right? Because you have done the work. I have done the work. And we're not so hyper vigilant or focused on these broken systems that will crumble, I believe, as those of us who populate them are just, we've evolved. We've evolved. So.
Thanks, Nadine. Yeah, and that idea of, we talk a lot at LRN about that idea of pausing as being an important skill that we as people and leaders and organizations themselves really need to develop. So thank you so much for that. Just getting back to the work of the Ethics and Compliance Office, Jennifer, you're so uniquely positioned within your organization. Any insights that you've gleaned from, like, what's been working at NRG, like in terms of assigning roles or areas of responsibility? In particular, it'd be great to hear about that intersection that we talked about, or you talked about, excuse me, as a partner to the Ethics and Compliance Office. Like, any insights on what's been working, any areas of emerging best practice that the folks watching can learn from?
Sure. So I think it is a unique position, but I think it works for us at NRG, and I think it's a model worth exploring because it creates a conversation. And there are times when ethics and compliance needs to drive, and they need to make sure that a message is heard, or that there are certain things that, look, this is the way that it is, period, full stop. And that is the message that we're sticking with. And then there are times when you're looking at it through a more diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, where you need to hold space and listen. It's not time to drive the conversation. It's time to sit back and host it. And I think where it works to our advantage is because it creates that conversation. It really takes into account how our employees feel and how our program relates to them. We, quite candidly, we've had conversations like for George Floyd's anniversary, where we wanted to tout all of the progress that we made within the program. And because we had a dialogue, we said, you know what, this is not the time to show all of the work that we made. This is a time to hold space and listen and reflect. And having that balance between the two, and also inclusive of HR, right? It's not just our two groups, it is inclusive of many other people in the organization, really allow us to create a program that resonates and hears what the employees are saying and what they're feeling, as well as making sure we still have that ethics and compliance lens so that it is balanced And it really gives the full breadth of what our program is about.
Thanks. And I'm gonna turn over to Rachel to kind of expand on some of the things you just shared, but I just want to remind people that the chat box, you can ask any questions or comments through the chat or the Q&A function. And we'll get to those questions here in a moment. Rachel, we talked about culture a little earlier. That's something that our community, the ethics and compliance community, deeply understands. You know, that programs are only as good as the cultures that are created in support of them. Just this morning, I saw an article, a new piece of research, I'm sorry, from Wharton that talked about how middle managers are really key to any kind of real impact in DE&I, and that is something too that the Ethics and Compliance Office really understands. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys, or how you personally think about DEI in terms of culture, and are there any really important distinctions that you make within CULT?
Yeah, you just reminded me that piece of research you shared. I once read an article that said, I can't remember where it was from, but middle managers are where DE&I initiatives go to die, because actually it can be the case where, I mean, they're so key, middle managers, aren't they, in terms of you know, the influence they have, and the feeling that how people feel about their role, their job, etc. I think for me, so culture is key. It's not separate from compliance though, because culture is made up of lots of little behaviors and beliefs and ways of working, and you know, there's a compliance element because we want people to really understand you know, the foundations and the expectations that we have from employees. But I think that from the way I see culture is it's transformational, and you cannot make change unless you're prepared to do something differently. And what that means is, like, rather than you know, a typical kind of change program where you've got all your milestones mapped out, and you know, you've mapped all your stakeholders, which you absolutely we do anyway, but there's also extra to that. There's an iterative, agile part to this. There's an element of trying things and being prepared to fail, not all at once, because measuring impact is so key as well. But I think there has to be an element of, you know, I mentioned that initiative, the Humans of CULT initiative. We were just going to do a quick, you know, half a dozen stories and see if they picked up, and it was really successful. We've had other things where we've done, let's try this, and it hasn't picked up as well. So I think with any kind of transformation, you have to be willing to try different things, and I think that is that's what culture is about, really. A lot of cultures, they grow organically. They're not done intentionally. It can be just the way things are. And if you want to be intentional about it, you know, you need those guardrails, you need the expectations of how we want people to behave, but you also need to be able to try and do things differently as well.
Thanks, Rachel. And follow up for you, or really any of you, any particular ways that you could share about getting intentional around that, either generally or as it relates to maybe some of those sticky pieces that can be hard to move, like we talked a little bit about, you know, middle managers being key.
Is it all right if I jump in again? So we talk a lot about intention, which is probably why, you know, why I use the word, because we talk about it a lot, and we talk about the fact that unless you are consciously including, you could well be unconsciously excluding. I think that's you know, a phrase that probably many of you have heard, but I think that there's got to be something intentional about inclusion. There's got to be an intentional approach. It cannot be you know, company X out there is doing this in the D&I space. That looks a good idea. Let's go copy it. You know, there has to be an understanding of where, I think you said at the start, Jennifer, meeting people where they're at, but also, you know, meeting your organization where it's at and what's right for this organization, and how it might be different for different organizations. And I think that's the intention piece as well. You know, doing some of that analysis, being data driven, which is hard in this space because collecting data is harder in this space. But I think that's just really central.
If I could quickly jump in, you know, being in the corporate space is you don't realize how much training and development that you've been privileged really to have, and flexibility, just what Rachel said, willingness to try new things at the risk that it might not work, but you tried anyway. That's not something that every industry or every space has that ability to do. So one of the things that made the initiative makes us very different is that we are quite content to build the plane as we fly it. And when we deal with researchers, or when we deal, they're like, oh my gosh, that is just so unnerving to them. Like, well, we don't know what the right answer is, but we're going to do this. We're going to track it, and maybe we'll have to iterate. That's a word that we're very comfortable with. So you do have to try to be willing to be comfortable with the unknown. And it takes a certain build up, like a muscle that you develop where you are building it as you fly it. And yeah, the whole thing could crash and burn, but you know what? We're going to fly this thing anyway. That's one thing. In the space of policing specifically, a lot of what we do is, and both Jennifer and Rachel mentioned it, meeting people, meeting them where they are, all of us where we are. And you have to get buy-in. You're talking to folks that have been very successful in their way of doing things, and now you are proposing a change that instead of warrior policing, which has its merits and value system, you are trying to persuade them to move to something that's more collaborative and proactive with civilians to keep us all safer. The question is, why should I do that? So you need to find what it is that you can bring them in so that, as uncomfortable as the change is, staying where they are is more uncomfortable. And in terms of wellness, in terms of safety, even for officers, a lot of the conversations we have, of course, not just focused on ourselves, we talk about their wellness. We need you well, we want you safer, and having a local community base that is more receptive and believes that you are fair and values the services that you bring within the community, your officers are also going to be safer, right? So you have to kind of show them that as difficult and as scary as change is, and I totally appreciate having everything in a nice little neat box, and don't disrupt that box. I know where it is. I know where my keys are. I know who you, right? You like that certainty. But you have to encourage people to be willing to be a little bit wobbly, because status quo is not sustainable. And it's more painful than the change that we are proposing. So that's the journey that we are on with our Blue collaborators, and it's been interesting and fun.
Jennifer, it looks like we're getting some questions in the chat, but anything you want to share on what Rachel and Nadine just shared before we go there? Okay, thanks. Okay, so we say how to get people to participate in diversity events. So how do we do that? It's hard when people are just one type of culture and used to old habits, and this is all new for them. Most people don't like changes and do not pay interest. Maybe that's attention. Help.
So I'm happy to answer this one, or at least start. It has its challenges, but I think it is that notion of finding commonality and really creating a dialogue. An example that I'll give is last year during Hispanic Heritage Month, our Hispanic BRG OLA wanted to host an event. And when we talked about the right speaker and what the topic should be, what we landed on was multi-brand marketing, because that was something, regardless of your background or how you identify, or if you're an ally or not, that everybody within our organization could relate to. It was driven with a business purpose, and it was very well received. And if that is how we can gain entrance, so that people recognize, look, I don't identify this way. I might be an ally. I might be a passive ally, but at least it's coming to the understanding that, hey, we have somebody from a diverse background speaking to something that matters to us as a company. So there's value in you attending this. There's value in your engagement. And then the only other thing that I would add is we always fall back on our philanthropic volunteering events, because that's a way to engage with people that are different from you, regardless of what different means to you, right? It might be socioeconomic, it might be how you identify, but it's an opportunity for you to get to know somebody in the community organization, or again, your fellow volunteers, in a way that you wouldn't get to know them day to day. So again, it's very intentional the way that we structure our volunteering and our giving, so that it does align with our business resource groups, which ladder up to our diversity, equity, and inclusion messaging, as well as our overall corporate culture.
Rachel or Nadine, any other tips or ideas you'd want to share?
I think give people something unexpected sometimes can work, and make sure that it's clear that if they attend, they're going to walk away knowing something more. One of our really recent successful events was actually around menopause in the workplace, and it was run by a women's network, but we made it really clear men are welcome to this discussion. And we got a lot of men sign up for the discussion, and comments on the chat were around, I'm going to share this information with my wife, this has been really helpful. Making sure that people know that everyone's invited, I think, is also key. Because no matter how many times we say, you still get people saying, is this for me as well? Yeah, everyone is invited. Please do come. So, yeah.
In the policing space with the initiative, this has been a challenge. This has been a challenge for us. So thank you for the question. We have not met a police department, whether they consider themselves to be community-oriented policing, which is something that we advocate for at the initiative, which is proactive, collaborative policing. Whether they subscribe to that philosophy or not, we have not engaged with a police agency that doesn't have some measure of community engagement. Coffee with a cop, trick or treat with the kids, Halloween, pickup ball. I recently attended like a block party that the precinct put on for the local community, with hot dogs and video games and bouncy houses and all of that. So that level of engagement is something that police that I've engaged with thus far are comfortable with. But when I talk to them about working together with members of the community in a sustained way toward a common goal, I hear different things. Well, we have a ticketing system. If there's a problem, if they need a speed bump, they can ticket. Or, well, there's of course 911. If there's a service call, we'll be out there. But when it comes to engaging, talking to each other in a sustained way, working together, we see, I wouldn't say resistance, because nobody's ever going to say, I don't want to talk to members of the community. It's just some discomfort, because it's not the norm. The police agencies that do collaborative, proactive policing very well are incredibly comfortable with this. They have neighborhood watches all over. They meet weekly with them. They've got, monthly town halls. When COVID hit, they moved it to Zoom. They take community-based surveys to find out what the community is thinking in terms of their policing services. Incredibly interactive and customer service oriented in their approach, but they are comfortable with that philosophy. So it is an excellent question. They're all good questions, but that one definitely touches on an area of challenge for the initiative when it comes to change.
Thank you. Another question came in that also relates to a challenge. So as organizations are moving from hierarchy to flat organizations, how do we expand roles and responsibilities while keeping employees engaged and create the desire for people to be inclusive of one another? Anyone can jump in.
So at NRG, we are still, we're not a flat organization, but I think the two tools that we use are business resource groups. Again, whether somebody identifies or whether somebody is an ally, we encourage both. But there we have over 14 business resource groups. So there's ways to engage, and we also, amongst our business resource groups, encourage collaboration between all of them. So you might have panelists from one participating on another. We often talk about our best practices, what's working, how can we communicate, how are we creating content. So we're really using them as the vehicle that drives our diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation. And then again, from a philanthropic lens, with our giving program, we try to support causes that people champion, right? So there is very much a corporate-led initiative that is large scale and ties to the business program or purpose, but we also champion individuals and the choice in terms of what they want to support. Additionally, from an equity and inclusion lens, we recently reduced the amount that we would match. So if you donate $1, NRG would match a set amount. And the minimum requirement to an organization was $25. And we said, you know what? Is that really that inclusive? Is that equitable? So we reduced that to the very lowest amount it could be, which is $10, so that more people can engage. So we really take this approach that we value you as an individual. Additionally, during COVID, because we wanted employee engagement and we struggled with, we can't volunteer, we can't be in person, how can we get employees to engage? So we have giving programs and initiatives that help drive dollars to specific communities, specific teachers and educational programs, because we want employees to feel that they are part of the conversation. They're not just receiving this information and taking it for what it's worth. So it is deliberate, it's thoughtful. Again, sometimes it resonates, sometimes it doesn't, but it's always evolving and listening and looking where you can make those adjustments so that people have that entrance of, okay, this might not resonate with me, but I do, really want to give to X organization or participate with this group.
Thanks. We only have a couple more minutes left. We have one question, one final question. So Angie writes, love the menopause in the workplace. We'll use that one for sure. Topic idea. Any other out of the box topics like older generations working with younger ones, or any other kind of ideas that you felt like have really worked within your organizations?
One of the really recent popular events was around being an active bystander. And it just really resonated. We got so many signups. We even from the sign-up levels, sometimes you get lots of signups, you get a few people drop off. I mean, everyone was there for this event and people were asking for it again. And it's just really you know, in the moment, how you can be there for somebody as an active bystander. I'm trying to think in terms of other things that we've done. I mean, lots around. I don't think it's really out of the box necessarily, but we're talking a lot about neurodiversity in the workplace, and that is really resonating because after every event we do, I get people reach out talking either about themselves or their son or their daughter, and people are interested in digital inclusion. So yeah, I could probably go on and on.
I love that. Nadine, anything from you?
Well, not really, because I'm not doing this in the corporate space, but good ideas though.
Yeah, and we are getting some compliments. I also feel as though that normalizing neurodiversity in the workplace, something we don't often see, so important. That's great. Well, I am disappointed in that we're coming to the end of our time. I have absolutely loved this discussion and would love each of you to come back for another one. I feel like we've just begun to kind of scratch the surface here. And you've definitely left us with a lot to think about. So thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for everyone for watching. Just one final request, you will be prompted to fill out a survey. And if you don't mind taking a couple of minutes, it certainly helps us. So thank you so much. I appreciate it, and have a lovely day.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, LRN. Thank you, all of you.